This introductory video about forms is just going to be the overview and the purpose of forms and MoveOn from a theoretical standpoint. So forms, as we all know in general, as a general concept, a form is basically just a structured document with a fixed arrangement. What does that mean? Seems kind of confusing, so let's define this. Purpose of a form, in a general sense, is just a method of collecting data and information. So that is why we're building forms and MoveOn. We want to collect information. We want to collect data. So that's great. But what kind of data do we want to collect? Basically, we need to look at our form. Forms could be used for lots of different purposes. We want to outline particular parts and have fixed content as instructions to the form taker in part one. And then in part two, we want to allow for blank spaces, boxes, fields, where the form taker can write, select, and enter information. Here's a very basic example of a form, a contact us form. So as in part one here, we're writing what is your name. We're prompting the form taker to for number two, creating the blank space for them to put their name. So we're asking three question items here, your name, your email, and message, allowing for three blank spaces as well. So this is a basic form, something that we can recreate in MoveOn to get three pieces of information, a name, an email, and a message. As with any form, there's two parties involved. There's the taker of the form taker, and the collector of the information. So if you're watching this video, you are going to be the collector of the information, but you might also be the form taker if you create a form for yourself or your colleagues. But in most cases, the taker of the form would be either students looking to go abroad, students looking to come inbound to your university for an incoming application form, maybe for your faculty staff of your university, some kind of a survey form for them to take. So there could be lots of different audiences to be the takers of the form, but in all cases, you will be the collector of the form information. Common features of forms. The form taker has to write less if they're prompted. They would prompt and remind them of what to provide. It allows for uniformity of convenience of processing. So this point is, as opposed to just asking somebody a bunch of different questions in different ways, we're providing this uniformity in the form of asking everything the same way. There are lots of different forms, shapes, natures of different forms that you could have. You could have surveys, you could have statements, you could have service requests, purchase orders. There's all these different kinds of forms we use in life for everyday purposes. Now in MoveOn, most of the time we're talking about applications to go abroad, application to come inbound, an application to apply for a grant, an application to propose a new partnership, something like that. But whatever the nature of the form, we can build it in MoveOn. Now MoveOn forms are web-based. That has certain advantages compared to just emailing your students, your faculty members, or your partners PDFs. If it's web-based, we're going to have these kinds of advantages. Not going to have paper. They're able to check themselves for completeness, as in we can make the form have a validation that it must be complete before they can hit save. You can make items mandatory. You can say that the form taker must give a certain piece of information before they can proceed. You can build in validation. So, for example, if you ask for an email address, what the form taker enters into the blank space must actually be an email address, as an example. We can have a submission confirmation. So depending on the way that you set up your form, we can have the form taker, after they hit submit, that they can get thanks for taking this form, your submission has been received, kind of a confirmation like that. All of your forms in MoveOn are automatically all stored online, so you don't have to print them and store them somewhere. And forms that are done in MoveOn can be processed in bulk. So forms in MoveOn, again, as a reminder, these are the primary way that new data should come into a MoveOn system. You could manually enter data, but in almost all cases that we can try to come up with, we want to have data come into MoveOn from the source of the data themselves via a form. So again, we could have different examples. We could have outbound application forms. We could have a registration for pre-departure form. We could have a survey for your faculty members of their international activities. We could have a request to process a new international agreement form. We could have emergency release forms for students going abroad, terms and conditions for partners of working with you, all kinds of different examples of forms are possible in MoveOn. Some other basics about forms in MoveOn: they are built in MoveOn, they're displayed online, they're stored on a MoveOn server, so you do not have to go to your university's IT or web team to work with them, because you can do it all in MoveOn yourself. The MoveOn forms can be branded with your university's logo, design, font, and colors. So we'll apply a code file, a CSS code file, to make sure that they look as much like your university's colors design as possible. You can actually have as many of forms as you want in a MoveOn system. The only caveat might be that you can a lot of times have a limited amount of active forms, forms that are activated. Most MoveOn clients can only have 10 active forms at a given time, but it does depend upon your license. Some licenses have unlimited active forms. And of course, any MoveOn client only sees and works with their own forms. Basically, it's just a web link that's created that you can share with whom you wish, with whoever you wish. In our next session, we're going to be talking about the form setup.